Well, I
typical
mean,
winter weather.
but still, I mean, same here. We've had about 10 days of plus, like 10 plus degrees. I think it got up to 17 yesterday. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah. What are you gonna do?
It
It's
was
It's
fantastic.
been gorgeous. It's just making up for when it's going to snow in June. So
well, no, well, it's gonna snow tonight for us, but
yeah.
yeah. Again, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. Okay, I think we've got a full room. So welcome everybody to Borderline Whisky Enthusiasts February tasting in March. So we appreciate everybody bumping it a week there so that we could get Andrew in on the tasting here. So just a brief introduction for those of you who don't know Andrew and Evan. I'll introduce them both. So Andrew is not only the owner of the Kensington Wine Market, but one of the most respected whiskey retailers in Canada. Just picked up another award last week while he was out east. He's been a longtime friend of certainly Crystal and I, but also the Whiskey Club. He's led both in-person and virtual tastings for us here. And he never hesitates to share his passion for whiskey, both with our club and others. He was recently at the Artisan Distillers Conference last week, sharing his retail wisdom with the craft distillers from across the country as well. And speaking of craft distillers, we fit into that category. I'm excited to say that Andrew will be the first retailer to bring Douglas into Alberta as well. So if you want to get your hands on a bottle, he's the guy to talk to, because that whiskey won't be for sale in BC or out of our location. Of course, I can't forget to mention that there was one time he shared some Yamazaki 25 with me. I think that was about 25 years or 10 years ago at the Victoria Whiskey Festival as well.
At least 10 years ago now.
Yeah, but it was fantastic, and I think that's just very reflective of Andrew and sharing fabulous whiskey with others. So that's Andrew. And Evan, when Andrew's not around, we know we can always count on Evan, who has hosted a virtual tasting with us, Borderline Whisky Enthusiasts as well. And he's an essential part of the Kensington Wine Market team, stepping up to host tastings with Andrew. And he shares his deep whiskey knowledge, and he ensures that whiskey lovers always leave a little wiser and a little thirstier. He's also had some unforgettable experiences at Dubh Glas Distillery. While I was serving gin, he sat neglected in a chair in the back of the distillery for what I can only think of was hours and hours, just neglected. And despite the hardship, he persevered, and he continues to educate and entertain whiskey fans everywhere. And we're lucky to have him here tonight. And I know that we're in for a fantastic tasting. So I'll leave it up to you guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve Lee. Always a pleasure to do these. And you know what? As much as it's nice to go and see people in person, it can be a bit of an effort. And you know, there's only so many free nights in the year or days. And beautiful as that part of the world that you live in is, it is a bit of a ways from everywhere. So it's nice that you're open to doing this type of tasting. Evan and I do, and our other people on our whiskey team do quite a few of these, because we're able to reach people that are not in just our local area, including people that live maybe in the deep south of Calgary and don't want to drive 40 minutes just to go to a tasting. Or I suppose to clarify that, have their spouse or a taxi or an Uber drive them 40 minutes and then have to come collect them again at the end. So we have noticed that there are benefits to this. You know, we've kept doing them ever since COVID because there is a demand, and I think it's fair to say, Evan, we have at least one a week almost on average.
Yeah, we should actually look up how many we've done since COVID, but it's probably been in the realm of you've probably been on at least 40 to 50 a year. We've hit the point for Kensington Wine Market where we essentially have a virtual tasting every single Tuesday of every week in the year. So we definitely do a lot of those of these. I don't think we've gotten any better at it, but people have learned to tolerate us, which is always important.
Yeah. But then, yeah, that's a fair point. We've probably done close close to 250,
Mhm.
maybe more. Hard to say, but we love doing them. I also, for selfish reasons, like them. Having been in the industry for 21 years now, as much as I like hosting tastings at the store, I don't like sticking around and cleaning up afterwards. So the nice thing about these virtuals is as soon as we're done, I just close my laptop and that's it. Put the glasses in the dishwasher. All my work is done. So
Yep.
yeah. But anyway, nice to see all of you. Thanks for tuning us in, and thank you to Steve Lee for reaching out to us to do this. So tonight's tasting is a pretty simple concept. All of them except one are single casks bottled for our store, and that other one is just not a single cask, but it was also bottled for our store. So it's this is a snapshot of, you know, things we have that are unique that no one else in the world has, which has kind of become I would say, the most important part of our whiskey business. And the
Yeah,
reason
absolutely.
for that is there's just there's lots of places people can buy their whiskey. You probably see them in your Instagram feed or on Facebook advertising all the time. And you know that type of business is fine. Like we sell things other people have too. A good product's a good product, but we're interested in curating things for people and having a range of things that no one else has. Provoking envy in our competitors is a lot of fun. Anytime I hear someone's jealous about something we did or we have, you know, that's better than making money, to be quite frank.
Mhm.
That's probably my favorite thing. Um, and you know, we've done a lot of these casks now. We probably even should do a recount because
Yeah.
I know the last time we seriously looked at this, it was about 2 years ago or more, and it was because Ashok asked us how many casks we bottled because he wanted to put that on our cask, which I think I've got here. And he put it on here, and it's at the bottom of the bottle. Uh, where is it? It's the 145th cask bottled for Kensington Wine Market. The joke about this one is by the time it came in, it was already closer to the 160th. Partly that was just because it takes a really long time to get anything out of India. But I would imagine we've got to be close to 170 or slightly above that by now.
Yeah. Yeah, we got to be hovering around there for sure.
Yeah.
There we don't really have Andrew talked about this the other day, or like a set quota or number that we're trying to hit for how many casks we get annually or when we get casks. It just kind of luckily we've been able to just follow the this looks good, so let's get it. And oh, we want to work with this producer, so let's see if we can get samples. There's never been sort of an accounting that's been at the forefront beyond whether Andrew can afford to bring it in once we decide to.
Well, sometimes, and I'm going to be completely honest here, that's not even a consideration because you're just
Mhm.
so excited and you want it. Yeah, I mean, we don't have a Machiavellian plan for when we're going to bring in fun stuff. We just bring it in, and sometimes too much of it arrives all at once.
Yep.
Fortunately, I think we've learned over time that we have to space things out a little better. Um, but one of the reasons I mentioned why the fact that we've done that many casks, which is a lot, is I don't think even the BC Liquor Board or the LCBO has done that many individual single casks. The reason I love talking about that is because when people come in and see our shop, it's a tiny shop and they're kind of blown away by how small it is and there's just stuff crammed everywhere. Um, the reason we're able to do that is because we've learned over time that we have customers across the country that can't try the casks before we bottle them. They trust us that they're good, and we don't take that trust for granted. And we're not just going to put our name on something because we think we're going to be able to flip it quickly.
Mhm.
There's more that goes into that. We know that consumer trust has taken decades to build up, and we're not going to squander it. So, um, even though we have a lot of single casks right now, um, you know, we're not just looking to do things to turn it over and sell another one. The liquid's got to be good, and the other big criteria is it has to be good value. Um, that changes over time, and it's subjective depending on what you're looking at. but we're big advocates for that. We push for value because a lot of things in especially Scotch whiskey got frankly way overpriced in the last 5 to 6 years. We've pushed back against that as hard as we could. And fortunately, some of that has borne fruit and will continue to. But you're probably getting thirsty. We should start off with the Linkwood. And before we say anything else, maybe just a little toast. Slàinte. Cheers, everybody.
Launch.
So the lineup we have for you tonight, 7 single casks, 1 high proof bottling. It's not even technically cask strength. Have gone in kind of a logical progression from lightest to strongest flavor profile, more or less. The last one might not be the strongest flavor profile, but I think in this range, it's kind of ending with a bang. But the first one there that we're starting off with is from a distillery called Linkwood. I can pop this up on the screen for you, just so you can see what I'm talking about. I do have all the bottles in front of me here, but this might be a little cleaner for you to see. So this has been bottled for us by an independent bottler called Berry Brothers and Rudd. I'm sure most of you have heard of independent bottlings. Essentially, it's when a single malt from Scotland, or frankly, a single malt from anywhere, whiskey from anywhere, is bottled by somebody other than the distillery. That would be an independent bottling. Berry Brothers and Rudd is the bottler. It's a fascinating company. It's a 330-year-old family-owned business in London. It's at number 3 St. James Street. You can visit their original shop that opened in 1695. It's still there. They've opened a wine shop just around the corner on the Pall Mall, the Diplomatic Street. They've also got a whiskey shop now on that street as well. But their original shop from 1695 is still there. They've preserved, not maybe from the 1690s, but from its historic and esteemed past, many of the the original architecture as well as furniture from this particular shop. But I love working with this company. They've been in the whiskey business for well over 100 years. They were responsible for a blend called Cutty Sark that you might have been familiar with or might have seen over time. For about 30 years, they managed the Glenrothes single malt brand. They never owned the distillery or the liquid. They just owned the right to promote Glenrothes as a single malt, which is sort of confusing, but just go with it. Yeah, they've been very good to us. We've gotten some incredible casks out of them over the years. This one here is just a beautiful, light, fresh, frankly, dangerously drinkable Linkwood.
Yeah.
Linkwood's a single malt that you don't see other than from independent bottlers. Diageo, the owners of it, use it almost exclusively for blending. They have done some official bottlings of it over the years, like their Flora and Fauna series, but they're very rare. Those have never, to my knowledge, been available in Canada. But Linkwood is a whiskey that amongst whiskey nerds is kind of beloved. And I love this one. It's, I believe, 13 years old. It's from an ex-bourbon barrel, 56.5%. And it is just lush, creamy, and fruity and floral on the nose. Evan,
Yeah, that creaminess is kind of what really sticks out to me on this one. I love the combination of the creaminess on the palate, the grassy notes that you're talking about on the nose, and then that great combination of fruit and floral with a light spice that comes out on the palate. It's Linkwood in ex-bourbon just texturally just tends to be fantastic. I think this is probably one of the better casks that really showcase the entirety of what Linkwood can do at this age. It's fun to have spirit like this in sherry casks and get the big sherry notes in here too, but getting this more naked style where the wood has some interaction with it, but you can really see how the spirit's coming into its own, is what makes it really exciting for me.
Yeah. So Linkwood's a fairly old distillery. If my memory serves, I think they were from the 1820s. So they were one of the original distilleries that opened after the Small Stills Act. It's located in the Speyside, very close to the city of Elgin. It is not open to visitors. I would love to go see it. It's one of there's got to be less than 20 distilleries out of 140 in Scotland that I've never been to, and Linkwood is one of them. but it's because it's really just, for lack of a better term, an industrial site for production of spirit. I mean, they produce a pretty big volume there. It's certainly in the, like, I think 5 to 8 million. I can tell Evan is leafing through Malt Whiskey Yearbook right now, so you can provide us
Yeah,
some more
5.6
accurate
million
info.
liters according to
Yeah.
the newest edition,
And was it from the 1820s?
1821.
There you go. So
You're on, man.
few years before the Small Stills Act. So Linkwood is kind of beloved. I mean, if you're familiar with Gordon MacPhail had their distillery labels range. They still do. Linkwood is a big part of that. They have Linkwood 15 and Linkwood 25 always available. If you've never bought those before, if you're ever looking for really good value, older whiskeys, the Gordon MacPhail distillery labels line, frankly, is hard to beat. Both the Linkwood 15 and the Linkwood 25 are relatively inexpensive for how old they are and for how good the juice is. I'm just going to put the 25-year-old up on screen here because, I mean, for price to age, the Linkwood 25 and the Mortlach 25 that Gordon MacPhail puts out there are almost impossible to beat. 46%, 25 years old, matured in Gordon MacPhail sherry casks. So not even matured in the type of sherry seasoned casks that most of the industry uses. And we're going to go into this deep later in the tasting about Gordon MacPhail. It's an absolutely beautiful whiskey. The 15-year-old, I think, is closer to $160. Excellent value. And yeah, just great juice. But yeah, I hope you all like that Linkwood. If anyone has any questions, if you have tasting notes you want to share over the course of the tasting, fire them into the chat. If you have questions you want to ask at the end, we can open it up and kill the video. Well, we're recording the tasting for people who can't make it, but we'll kill the recording and open it up if anyone wants to ask a question in person. But yeah, great starting whiskey. Yeah, dangerously easy drinking.
Yeah, it's really a showcase, and these first two are a showcase for, in my opinion, what makes independent bottlers so fantastic to work with. We've been really lucky to have a really good relationship with Berry Brothers and Rudd for quite a while, and we'll get cask samples set from them from time to time. Usually the one downside is the cask samples are absolutely tiny
They've
and really
promised me
hard
that'll
to.
be better.
That's good. Yeah, we've essentially gotten cask samples that aren't much bigger than this for some of them, where
Yeah.
if you're trying to select by committee, it gets difficult sometimes. But the great thing is we get a Linkwood next to a Blair Athol, next to a Tobermory, next to a whatever. Independent bottlers are usually able to give you a pretty good variety of casks and variety of distilleries to select from. And it just makes it really exciting. It's always fun to see one distillery and try a few different from the range, but seeing a bunch of different cask samples from different distilleries at different ages is probably my favorite thing to come into work and do.
So one funny side note on that, Evan, is the sales managers didn't realize how small the samples that their warehouse team were sending. So they're like, I think they were like, what are you guys doing? Like, you're giving them, like, what is it, 10 milliliters to choose?
Yeah, it was like essentially
Yeah.
enough to do a virtual tasting sample with, but
Yeah,
that's about it.
exactly. All right, so that's the Linkwood. The next one we're on to is from a distillery called Blair Athol, which is located in the Highlands in a very beautiful little town called Pitlochry. Pitlochry is a little bit like Banff or Jasper. Maybe Jasper is a slightly better analogy. It's a bit of a, beautiful little tourist trap town, nice little hotels. People go there to go hiking. It's a very peaceful spot. It's just in the opening of the mountains on the southern edge of what they call the Cairngorms in Scotland. It's a fairly old distillery, 1798. It's beautiful old stone, covered in ivy, like covered in vines. Beautiful old stone distillery. But it's, again, like Linkwood, it's not a whiskey that is promoted from the standpoint of single malts. It is a whiskey that has been produced by and large for the blended whiskey industry. And on that note, predominantly for a brand called Bell's. Bell's whiskey, if you're familiar with that. So this is our first ever cask of Blair Athol. I just don't think there's been a ton of opportunities over the years for that, but we really liked this one. It's 14 years old, 59.1% from a hogshead cask, presumably refill hogshead. It's not overly oaky on this. But I think, Evan, when we talked about this, and based on the tasting note, I think our suspicion was that this was probably American oak ex sherry
Yeah.
seasoned, because it's got a little bit of a tannic structure that kind of is reminiscent of sherry. And the confusing thing is the sherry industry uses both American and European oak casks for maturation, or sorry, for whiskey. They're seasoned. They're not, this is not a maturation cask. I guess this is a sherry seasoned American oak cask is the most likely case. But the one note that I love out of this, because it is indicative of a lot of the other young Blair Athols we've seen, especially if they're not heavily sherried, is there's this iron note to it. It's almost a little bloody.
Mhm. Yeah, there's some great just full-on grain notes coming out too. I tend to be the cereal and candy guy when it comes to making tasting notes, and for me this just reminds me of opening up a box of Wheaties right now.
But I mean, are you talking about the Wheaties where there's like no sugar or anything? It's just that
Yeah,
dry.
there's definitely some
Wheaties?
sugar to this, but the grain note itself, it reminds me of the no sugar Wheaties. This is like going back to when Wayne Gretzky was on the box, like before Wayne Gretzky was dead to all Canadians.
Because it reminds me more of like frosted mini wheats, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I could see that that sort of icing sugar note in there, or
I
a
don't
bit more
allow myself to
confectionery.
consume such decadent cereals, breakfast cereals anymore, but it does remind me of like frosted mini wheats with like after you pour the milk in and they start to go just a little soggy.
Yeah, but it does have that sort of metallic, slightly bloody note to it,
Mhm.
and it just comes off as more robust stylistically versus the liquid.
Mhm. So when you go to the palate after the nose, like that sherry profile is much more prominent
Mm.
than it was before. Bits of Christmas cake, loads of candied fruit,
Yeah,
leather, chocolate. It's a little musty as well. Like there's this kind of damp leaf litter, like damp, earthy moss sort of note coming off it too.
yeah, it's making me think of like uncooked potato skins
Mm.
a little bit of earthiness to it, and again, really nice and robust on the palate, but it's got these great fruit notes coming through as well, and still big malt in there.
Evan, I can't say that I've been tempted to taste uncooked potato skins.
Yeah,
But I just have this idea of you like taking a raw potato and just like a brown, what are those brown
yeah,
ones? Are those the russet potatoes?
yeah.
Just like
Like the Iron
digging right
Chef
into
does
it
with
with
the
your
bell
teeth.
pepper, just like chomping into it kind of thing.
Yeah. So Patrick's saying I find it a tad muddy. I think that's that earthy, musty, kind almost
Hmm.
mushroomy note to it. Like it's got a bit of
Yeah,
a sauteed mushroom vibe. Uh, Now the thing is like this kind of style, like why do distilleries produce styles like this? And like others like Mortlick, which is a bit more meaty and slightly sulfury, is the distillers look for blends like these, or sorry, single malts with profiles like this to add texture and character to their blends. So Blair Athol, I mean, the interesting thing to think about it is that it's not a single malt made for consumption as single malt. It's a single malt
yeah,
made for blending. And that earthiness, muddiness, like Dan said, I mean, that's characteristic of the distillery's style that's going to add a component to a blend. The idea of a blend is that you add different components together and you get something greater than any of the individual parts. The Linkwood is something that's going to add a lushness to it. It's going to add floral notes. It's going to add softer elements. Um, Much like another distillery, Glenrothes, Linkwood is more of like what they call a top dresser malt. It's something that
mm,
you add in small doses to kind of lighten and soften something up near the end. Whereas this Blair Athol, I mean, this is a bigger, grippier, more robust single malt, one that I would imagine they're using in a lot in sherry casks, again, to add that sort of earthy, spicy component to the blends.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As Andrew's alluding to, with the component portion of it is blenders would never be looking at this as like a singular, it's ready to go on its own. This is all meant to be put into the mix where you're looking at, well, this is going to add X, this one's going to add Y, and they're working with ingredients more than they are working with like fully ready to go whiskeys at that point and trying to get to the point that they want to with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you're wondering why, like, why don't they think of this, or why, the reality is Diageo owns 30-ish distilleries in Scotland. It already markets what, 7 or 8 of them as single malts.
Mhm.
I think its logic is they're not going to do that with all the rest of them, because then they would just start competing against the ones they're trying to focus on. And as good as Linkwood and as good as Blair Athol are, although I would say I'm a bit more partial to the Linkwood,
Mhm.
Diageo just doesn't see a need to promote these as single malts. These
Yeah.
are workhorses for their blends.
Yeah, I added a few drops of water to this, and it almost brings me back to like elementary school days of chewing on an HB pencil,
Wow.
where you're getting a little bit of that woody note in with some mystery flavor, but it still does have these really nice orchard fruit notes coming out with that, and a bit of wine gums as well for me.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, Evan. I'm going to apply some science to my whiskey too to see what happens. Um, which has become my euphemism for adding water. Incidentally, I know you might have had other people come and do tastings for you. Everyone has their own version of facts with water, but one of my big pet peeves is people promote the idea that water opens whiskey up. I'm not sure what Steve Lee's opinion is on that, but my opinion is that, like, that's very misleading and confusing. It implies that whiskey's always better when you add water to it as opposed to when it's not there. Um, I think the reality is it changes the spirit when you add water to it. There's a chemical reaction that happens, heat is released, and the changes in it can be either very minute or they can be drastic. But the big challenge here and the big thing is no one can tell you whether you'll like it with water. Only you can decide that for yourself. Like, everyone's palate is unique, everyone's palate is different. Um, by and large, I'd say I prefer most whiskeys without water, even if they're at higher proof. But on occasions, I will acknowledge there's something about specific whiskeys that are improved by it. But then you get into other confusing factors like time and, temperature, humidity. I'm sure elevation even plays a role in some of these things. I've done tastings in places like the Okanagan before, where it was really hot and humid at the time, and the whiskeys start to fall apart in the glass before you're even done the tasting. Like, you can see them starting to kind of fall apart. But yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is if you want to add water, great, but don't let someone tell you that you should, or that you always should, because it'll be better, because they're wrong. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very individual thing. When we're doing tastings like this, and I'm guessing a lot of you that have done a lot of tastings probably feel the same way. Cask strength or no, it's best to try the whiskey as it is first, and then decide where your palate wants to go from there. Whether you feel like it needs to be a little bit lightened up by some water, whether it needs anything else to it. But water for me, I've started to think of as like an agitator, where it's kind of like you add a few drops to the whiskey, it's jostling all the molecules around, bringing different scents and aromas and flavors to the fore. And then if you go back to that whiskey again, half an hour from now, it's kind of going to reintegrate and kind of
mhm.
not go back to square one, but get back to where it was and integrate more fully together.
Yeah. So, like, just for me, like, for fun, I added water to the Linkwood. I actually think it ruined the Linkwood. I think the Linkwood was so light, was so lush and like juicy, and it's lost that with adding the addition of water. Whereas the Blair Athol seemed to take the water okay. It did mute the nose a bit, but it didn't
Mhm.
really seem to change the overall profile of the whiskey that much. So
Mhm.
it did make the nose smell a little bit like beef or chicken stock, though,
Mhm.
which was interesting. So if you're into that kind of thing. Should we move on to the Glenfarclas?
Yeah.
So, I actually, this was the one whiskey I was concerned we might have already tasted with you last year. Steve Lee, do you remember what date we did your tasting last year, or is that sometime probably in February?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know our last one that I had recorded was in 2022, actually.
No. Okay. But I'm pretty sure we did a tasting last year. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I
we
believe
did.
so as well. Yeah, in 2023 or 2024.
That was 2024, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway,
The YouTube video went up on February 26th.
so there you
So
go.
that might have been a couple days after we actually did the tasting.
And I think this is a whiskey that I probably would have wanted to put into that range, but we probably decided on the range and poured it weeks before we actually did it. And this whiskey wasn't launched until mid-February, February 11th last year. So if you never heard the story, I was very rudely awoken on February 11th, 2022 by my phone, which went off at 4:56 in the morning. And the reason it went off at 4:56 in the morning is we'll give him the benefit of the doubt and call him a gentleman because he probably was someone's, he was someone's son. Long story short, he drove a Dodge Ram pickup truck through the front entrance of our store in an effort to rob us. He was not overly successful. He did an enormous amount of damage, about $250,000 when all was said and done, to steal 5 bottles worth less than $500. We could have been very well, and I think I learned this I was about a week in. I was like, well, we can be very bummed out about this, depressed, angry, but it's not going to solve anything. And we have to keep the rest of the team like motivated and happy.
This is after you went through the 12 stages of grief or whatever you got to
Yeah,
this
I
point.
went through the 12 stages of grief over the space of about 3 days. And I had to and just realize we gotta turn this around. So you know what? We're not going to be angry, including at the guy who did this, who is probably going to be in jail for quite some time. We're not going to be angry that it happened because things like this happen to lots of people. But we're going to do what we do when things go awry at Kensington. We're going to have some fun with it. So we released this on the 2nd anniversary of the break-in, which we called the infamous Dodge Ram incident. And it is our first ever door crasher bottling. We didn't do one this year or the first year because it took a lot of time to actually get this one pulled together. But we did door crasher sales instead to mark the anniversary of the event. Our version, I guess, of turning lemons into lemonade. And we didn't want to get sued by Dodge, so we have a Trojan Ram speeding towards the front entrance of the store. There's a bunch of little Easter eggs in here, but my favorite one, if you'll recall, was that the break-in was at 4:56 in the morning. So the whiskey was bottled at 56%. There was also another reason we did this because it saved about $5 a bottle. If we were going to do a true cask strength whiskey, we would have had to wait until the whiskey was in the bottles because it can lose up to 1 percentage point from the point it goes from the tank it's being stored in into the bottles, going through all the hoses and whatnot. So what they said to us was, if you're happy with a specific strength as opposed to cask strength, we can print the labels ahead of time and save you $5. And I think save them a lot of hassle. So we agreed to bottle it at 4:56 in the morning. I won't read it. You can look at it on your own. But there's a little quote on the back of the bottle. It's all on our website. But it's a Homer Simpson quote involving I believe Lisa told her dad that the Germans had the same word for crisis and opportunity. And Homer said, yes, Lisa, crisatunity. So this is, I suppose, also a crisatunity bottling.
Mhm. Yeah, so this is actually we've been lucky enough with Glenfarclas to do a few different batch bottlings. I think this is our third 15-year-old, if I remember correctly, that we've done.
It's our 7th Glenfarclas that's not a single cask. We've also done 2 single casks.
Yeah.
Quite rich. Some nice sherry tones to that on the nose, quite candied. lot of like kind of chocolate and dark fruit. So it kind of reminds me of like Glossette
Mhm.
raisins, both on the nose and palate. And I'm kind of really getting those Glossette raisin notes tonight. A lot of dried and stewed dark fruit notes as well.
Yeah, dates were coming to mind for me, especially, but it's definitely has the sort of the typical sherry toffee and butterscotch coming through, but
Very
it's
figgy.
been neat. Yeah, very figgy. It's been neat too because each batch of the 15 that we've had is shown quite differently.
Mhm.
Um, and it's surprising because Glenfarclas is just one of those distilleries that I think of being so consistent, but they still do have batch variation.
Well, they have enormous batch variation. I mean, it is an interesting comment or thing to circle back on for a moment because unlike
Mhm.
all of the other seven whiskeys in tonight's range, we didn't get to pre-sample this. So these Glenfarclas batches that we do are the only exception we have to the rule where we don't bottle a cask without trying it first. We have done that a couple times, and I think we've done it twice, and both times we felt a little bit burned by it when we didn't actually sample the whiskey ahead of time. Although, Evan, I think we need to revisit our Barry's Clynelish because I think it's getting better the longer it's in the
Cool.
bottle. Um, out in Ottawa at the dinner, I introduced it, and it's still a little vegetal, but it's starting to get waxier.
Cool.
Regardless, Glenfarclas does these batches for us, and it's the same liquid that will be going into a batch often of 15-year, although apparently that has not always been the case. But what they're doing for us is instead of bottling it at 43, or in the case of their 15-year-old 46, they're bottling it for us at a higher proof. And again,
Hmm.
not cask strength, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, this is almost cask strength.
Yeah.
Other salient facts, I guess, quickly about Glenfarclas Speyside Distillery. Although, one of the other things I love telling people is that I think regions are meaningless in Scotland, other than to tell you roughly where the distilleries are in the country, because you can make any style of whiskey anywhere in Scotland. So
Mhm.
don't let anyone tell you something's a Speyside style whiskey, because that's an almost meaningless term. There's 60 something distilleries in the Speyside, and they have a very broad range of profiles. Um, Glenfarclas, family-owned distillery. It's now the oldest family-owned distillery in Scotland. Uh, Used to be Springbank, but since Headley Wright passed on and then put the distillery into a trust for the town, Glenfarclas now has that honor. It's in its fifth generation. There was a sixth generation, but that there isn't anymore. He's been retired from the business. But there may be a nephew, I believe, in the offing that will continue the legacy of the distillery on, because the Grants have owned Glenfarclas since, I believe, 1865. The distillery is officially from 1836, but there is a painting of a farm called Reichlocken Farm, which was the original name for the Glenfarclas distillery from, I believe, the 1760s or 1770s. And said farm appears to show a smokestack and what appear to be barrels all around it, which makes it look a lot like a distillery. So Glenfarclas as a business could be as much as 250, 260 years old. The problem is we just don't know. There aren't any records, but
Yeah.
for one painting that seems to imply it.
Yeah. Yeah. They intentionally didn't keep records before it was legal to make this stuff.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if the nephew will have to change his name to George or John, or if he still has the name John or George already.
Which is an appropriate joke.
Everybody, yeah,
Well,
his,
you
yeah, you go
well,
ahead.
you tell it. It's your
Yeah.
joke.
So historically, for the grants, the five, what was once six generations, it was essentially alternating on the father being John and then the son being George and then the father being George and the son being John, through that line. So there has never been an owner that was not a John or George
Yeah.
so far.
I mean, there's precedent for this in history. When Caesars would appoint their heir, they would often adopt someone, and then that person would change their name. So, um, you
Well,
know,
I mean, King Charles could have changed his name if he wanted to as well. So
oh, Well, kind of like a pope.
Yep.
Anyway, last salient point about Glenfarclas. Most of their whiskeys are sherry cask. It is their core style. But I think the one thing that really makes them unique is they've got a nice weight to them. And part of that is how they make their whiskey. They're one of the few distilleries that still direct fires their stills. And so this creates forget the name of the reaction, but it actually caramelizes some of the sugars before they get stripped out by the stills. And there's only a handful of other distilleries that still direct fire, like Springbank. And it has an appreciable difference on the spirit. I think it adds a little bit more texture and a little bit more weight to them.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of them, but every now and then there'll be an independent bottling of Glenfarclas, which is almost never called Glenfarclas, but that comes in an ex-bourbon cask. And it still has this oily weight to it typically. Like that's the spirit itself really singing through.
Mm-hmm. Well, staying in the sherry vein for yet another whiskey, the next one up is a Dutch single malt. Steve Lee, have you guys ever had Millstone in a tasting before?
We have.
Okay. So some of you may be familiar with Millstone, others perhaps not. It's a very small Dutch distillery in, I think it's called Baden-Nassau. It's in the southern Netherlands. And the distillery, I believe it originally dates from the 1970s, though the Van Zwiedem family who own it, it's Zwiedem Distillers, has been in business for quite a while longer than that. Patrick Van Zwiedem has been there since 1990, or no, might have been there longer than that. He's been there since at least 95 because that's the first year he laid down single malt whiskey. This is a much younger cask. It's from 2016. And before we get into the whiskey, but don't feel like you have to wait on us, go ahead and get your nose in there and start nosing it. There's a funny story behind this bottle here because this is an image of our store. It's from a painting my wife gave me for Christmas 3 or 4 years ago. I thought it was a fantastic painting. It's hanging in the store. And at one point in time, I thought, we should use that for something at some point in time. And this is also, I should add, this is our old entrance. This is the pre-Dodge Ram, infamous Dodge Ram incident entrance. Well, we had this Millstone cask coming. They're like, what do you want to put on the label? I didn't really know. And I thought, as a stopgap, we'll put the painting on the label that my wife had made. So I thought this was a great idea. The label came back. I thought it looked awesome. So we brought it in. Very proudly brought the first bottle home the day I had it to show Jen. And my wife's a lawyer. First thing she says when I bring this bottle home is, do you have the rights to use that image? To which I replied, I guess not, but you're my lawyer. So if I get sued over the use of this image, you'll protect me, right? Whether she will or not will remain to be seen. But it is a lovely young sherried single malt. One of the things that's unique about Millstone single malts is that Patrick Van Zwiedem, when he started making whiskey in the early 90s, didn't have access to the modern sherry seasoned casks that distilleries like Macallan, Glenfarclas, and everybody else have been relying on for decades. And he accidentally stumbled into a supply of what are known as sherry seasoned casks or sherry maturation casks, Solera casks that mature sherry for decades. And that's what he matures his single malts in, other than bourbon. And there's quite a difference. I mean, for how dark this is, the nose on this is quite soft. The approach of the whiskey is quite soft. It doesn't have anywhere near the acidity or the spice that you'd expect to get from a young first fill sherried whiskey of this age. But the reason for that is that these casks aren't seasoned with sherry for just 3 to 6 or 9 months. They're maturing sherry for decades. So they're not going to have as much character to give right off the bat because that sherry that's been in there over time will have soaked some of that out. And so it's a softer, more gentle sort of sherried profile than what you'd get from most other distilleries.
Yeah, it's got this, both they make fantastic rye as well. And both their rye and this single malt and some other single malts I've had from them tend to have this. I don't know. I can only describe it as like dipping the orange peel from an old fashioned in the old fashioned and then
Yeah.
chewing on it. It just has this nice citrus note that's
Mhm.
like citric and like ripe at the same time, super juicy. And then these great like brandy cherry notes and going into some dried fruits and a touch of like a sappiness on the nose as well. That just keeps everything fresh.
Going back to those old school sherry casks, what I really love about them is they're sort of lively and fresh. They're not as drying and tannic and sort of tiring as sherry seasoned casks are. So to Evan's point about this having sort of that the sweetness and the citrus of
Mhm.
a young or sorry of like an old fashioned cocktail, it's just bursting with like juicy fruit, sugars, spice, but it's all very balanced, all very subtle. I did see that question there. Someone was asking, Evan started to answer, what is direct fire? So when you're distilling, you have to heat your still. And most distilleries now will use steam coils or some other kind of heating element so that they can kind of evenly and consistently heat up their wash. And I suppose after that, their low wines at a consistent point. Um, the old way they used to do this was by literally lighting a fire under the still, and usually it would have been coal or wood back in the day. No one does that anymore, except for I believe Yoichi in Scotland still uses coal fire to heat their stills. Um, the advantage of the more modern techniques of using steam coils, or I suppose even like an electrical coil inside there, is that you can heat things up at a more consistent rate. The problem with using a fuel source or a fire source is that you're literally burning something underneath the still to heat it up, much like a gas stove, and you probably don't have quite the same level of precision when you're doing that. I mean, Steve, you're the distiller here. Um, like, what do you must have like a steam coil or something like that to heat your still, right?
Yeah, we have a steam jacket, so
Yeah.
which is nice and even. It's efficient, but it's just a different way of getting to your end goal. So
But
Mhm.
I mean, if we're talking like most distilleries in Scotland would use steam coils because their stills would be probably a little larger than yours on average. But then I suppose when you're talking direct fire, there's literally one point, and maybe it's a wide point, but there's one point at the bottom of the still where the heat is hitting it, and it's that the heat is then transferring from that point to the rest of the through the rest of the still.
Yeah, so you end up
there
with hot
used to
spots
be
and
a.
Sorry,
Go
Steve,
ahead,
go
Evan.
ahead.
Sorry. There
no,
used to be a
go
couple
ahead,
of
Steve.
distilleries in a couple of distilleries in British Columbia that were direct fired. There's
Cool.
not anymore, just due to the hazard that's associated with it.
Well, here in lesser regulation Alberta, there is one distillery that's direct firing their stills with a flare stack burner, which is a piece of equipment from the oil and gas industry, which is sort of incredible. Um, but I mean, there's pros and cons to both, right? Like there's like for especially for what you do, and especially for making things like gin, you probably don't want to burn your wash at all. Whereas, with if you're making whiskey, that might be okay depending on the profile you're going for. But then you probably risk not having like having less consistency in your distillate when you're doing that as well.
Yeah, I think everything's going to have an effect. And you've seen some of those Scottish style stills that actually have the line inside the still as opposed to a steam jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, an interesting topic. But yeah, hope you like the Glenfarclas and the Millstone, those two sherried whiskeys, because we're now going to go on to something a little older. We're going to go on to a 23-year-old Glentauchers. Glentauchers is a distillery owned by Pernod Ricard or Chivas Brothers. It predominantly goes into blends. but it's from a different big whiskey company, as I mentioned. Uh, Predominantly goes into the Ballantines blended whiskey. And fun fact, Evan, I was looking into this last week
Yeah.
in the Malt Whiskey Yearbook. They're, Chivas Brothers is in the process of modernizing and growing this distillery. And they're taking it from, I believe it was 4 or 5 million liters a year up to 16, which begs the question, like, do they not know there's a surplus of maturing spirit in Scotland right now, and
Yeah.
therefore no need to almost quadruple the size of Glentauchers?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is just they're planning ahead for the next 3 distilleries they have to sell off to Billy Walker,
To Billy Walker,
and just making sure that they still have the volume after that.
right? Which is a clever joke because if you don't know, Billy Walker, who brought Ben Riach and Glendronach back to life, both of which he bought from Chivas Brothers Pernod Ricard. When he sold that company, because his investors wanted out, he took his winnings and used them to buy Glenallachie from Chivas Brothers Pernod Ricard, which we all find kind of humorous. But Glentauchers, 1798. We don't see a ton of Glentauchers on the market. Handful of independent ballers seem to have it. Gordon MacPhail seems to have more than almost anyone else. It tends to do very well in sherry, but also it's one of these single malts, again, not made for bottling as single malt, but if it's got a couple of decades behind it, even in a refill cask, it can become quite beautiful. Established 1898 in the Victorian whiskey boom. It closed, I believe, a few years later, but then was revived. There was a big crash in the whiskey industry in the late 1800s. One of the first big whiskey booms that turned to bust. There might be a third one underway, just saying. Some speculation, but Evan, what do we get on this Glentauchers?
Yeah, it's so that we did have I was looking at last year, we had the 2007,
2006.
2006 Glentauchers in this lineup for the Borderline whiskey tasting then, but this one is a lot older. It's a lot more sherried as well. Big sherry notes, some nice chocolate in it is coming through.
And Evan, I don't know if you recall this or if you've been on a tasting since, but I remember asking Stephen Rankin from this, who
Yeah.
Steve and I were talking about, is in the Okanagan right now because he's a big curler and his wife's into curling. His wife actually has a gold medal in curling for the UK. Stephen Rankin's one of the 4th-generation family members who owned Gordon MacPhail. And I asked Steve Lee about the cask number on this whiskey because it's an unusually large cask number. You can see it here, 166-02001. And I said to Stephen Rankin, I said, what's going on here? That's a very unusual cask number. Is it a finish? And he thought about it for a second. He's like, yeah, 100%, it's a finish. And the weirdest part about this is that he believes it was finished. The last 4 digits on there are the year. So it was transferred from presumably bourbon to a sherry hogshead in 2001, just a year after it was distilled. So this might not have been stock that Gordon MacPhail had bought at birth. It might have been stock that they acquired a year old, put into their own sherry casks. Gordon MacPhail famously has the highest standards for sherry casks of any producer in Scotland. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. If any distillery tells you they have the best wood policy in Scotland, which I believe Macallan is famous for saying, that is only true if their wood policy is as good as Gordon MacPhail's, and usually it's not. Incidentally, and I love throwing this out there, if you see Macallan bottle anything over 50, 60 years of age, they bought it back from Gordon MacPhail. It was stock that Gordon MacPhail bought from them, put into their own wood because they didn't trust Macallan to put it in a good enough sherry cask, and then sold back to them 5, 6 decades or 8 decades later. To profit from and build a distillery with. Gordon MacPhail is a fascinating company. They own 2 distilleries, Ben Romick and the Cairn. We actually have a Ben Romick we're launching next week. It's, I think, our 6th cask of Ben Romick. It is a 2002 bourbon cask, like a waxy, fruity, smoky bomb of a whiskey. Absolutely gorgeous. Tastes like Brora, which is a closed distillery you can't even buy anymore, unless you want to pay many, many thousands of dollars. But back to this Glentauchers, Stephen told me that this is a finish, which kind of makes sense because it's got this sort of dumpy, goopy, like really, really intense sherry notes right off the bat on the nose. Also, we talk about this with our staff. I also think this is probably more modern style sherry than a historic style of sherry. So this is the sherry style that companies like Macallan, Glenfarclas, Aberlour use today, but it's very, very well done. It's very elegant. Loads of leather, tobacco, and chocolate on this.
Yeah, and when Andrew's talking about sherry season casks, there's not really a way for the industry to get away from that at current production levels, just because there's not enough sherry that's drank for one thing, but it's also the amount of casks that are needed. You can't just sit around and fully mature sherry that you're just going to dump after that anyways. It's going to take too long. The casks are needed before you even get to that point.
And the sherry then gets put into, well, it gets made into sherry vinegar. Some of it gets redistilled and or it gets distilled after it's been used and put into brandy or used as ethanol to water down gasoline in Spain. But the salient thing about Gordon MacPhail is that they don't season their sherry casks for just 3, 6, or 9 months. They'll season them for, I believe it's between 3 and 6 years. So that's one thing that makes them different. The other is they specify a thicker stave. So they're paying to have more wood, thicker wood on their casks. And the reason for this is they're trying to replicate what the original sherry casks were, which were known as sherry transfer casks. And these were casks that they would put sherry into to ship it from Spain to the United Kingdom, where people would then go to a shop, bottle it, and take it home. And then those casks, once they were empty, would get bought by the whiskey producers who would put their whiskeys into it. So it's the most traditional style of sherry cask you can get. That's not an actual bodega sherry, Solera or maturation cask, which are really, really hard to come by.
Yeah, just a fantastic whiskey. Still really lively and juicy. It does have some tannin to it, but it's not heavy. Really nice nuttiness that comes through on the finish for me right now.
Yeah, lots of candied fruits, chocolate, tobacco, spices. The spices ranging from everything like light and fresh and decadent, like ginger, but all the way to clove, woody spices, fennel, lots going on. It's a lovely whiskey. If you're into cigars, I think this would be an incredible whiskey for cigars. I only have at most one a year or maybe two, so I'm not the best for commenting on that. But yeah, big, rich, and intense. Hopefully you're able to save a little bit of this to contrast it with the last whiskey, which even though that last whiskey is lightly peated, it's a good contrast to see modern like this one versus old school style sherry, which is what we're going to get with the last one. Anything you want to add on that, Evan, before we move on to the next one?
No, it's well, we might as well just say this is like the second. I kind of alluded to it, the second Glentauchers, or was it the third Glentauchers G&M that we had all around the same time?
No, it's second Glentauchers.
Yeah.
We had a Glen and a Blair before that.
Yeah, it tends to, it's like Linkwood, it definitely has its own following. And you see that a lot with a lot of these distilleries where everything goes into blends. You'll get these groups of whiskey lovers that just kind of glom on and chase everything from that distillery.
So the next whiskey we've got is our first ever cask from Ardmore. It's also the first Ardmore single cask to be sold to a retailer in Canada. It is not the first Ardmore single cask to come to Canada. They did, I think the Le Club de Scotch Whisky de Quebec beat us by about 3 months, partly because when we were initially asking for samples of Ardmore, they misunderstood what we were asking for. what I was trying to imply to them was that we were not afraid of whiskeys that were young on paper. What they heard from that was we wanted a whiskey that tasted young, and that was not what we were looking for. Uh, I guess between Scottish English and Canadian English, something got lost in translation there. But the second round they nailed. Ardnamurchan is amongst about 50 distilleries that have opened in Scotland since 2005. It is at the front end of that, although, I mean, the first two were Daft Mill and Kilholman in 2005. Ardnamurchan opened, I believe, started distilling 2013 or probably 2014 is when they started distilling, because they've got a 10-year-old that's out now. There are might as well say it, there are too many distilleries in Scotland. There are too many people making whiskey. There's too much liquid. The market is kind of saturated, and a lot of these new distilleries are not going to make it. One of the ones that I think is going to make it is Ardnamurchan, partly because they're far enough ahead of the curve that they're already at 10 years old. I mean, Evan, how many others have hit 10 years old? Wolfburn,
Yeah,
Daft Mill, Kilholman. Like, there's not many others that have gotten to
no.
the mark yet. But they also make whiskey the way it was made 50, 60 years ago, old school techniques. Their unpeated spirit uses both brewers and distillers yeast. They have very long fermentations. You know, Steve Lee, we've never talked about your spirit, but like, how long are your fermentations?
Typically 72 hours, but we've done much longer just for experimentation.
Yeah, like by
Cool.
Scottish standards, 72 hours is fairly long. Like, that would be longer than most. Ardnamurchans, I think, go well over 100 hours, 120 hours. And with both their peated and unpeated spirit, because they're trying to create a whiskey that's both, well, they're trying to, I guess, emphasize very fruity esters in their distillate. And that's why they believe going into these very long fermentations will get that. And that's what, I mean, a lot of the distillers before the 1960s and 70s did, is long fermentations. And then, you know, with their unpeated distillate, this addition of brewer's yeast for added complexity. So we love what they're doing. We think they're doing it very, very well. This is a full peated version. It's a 7-year-old single cask bottled for our shop. They have their own way of classifying things, which personally probably is a little on the too cute side and a bit confusing, but it's working. So if it's working, probably don't change it. But yeah, lots of geeky facts on this that they give you. They've got a blockchain way of giving you far more information than you ever asked for. So we know that this whiskey was made from concerto barley grown at Broomhill Farm, and it was peated during the malting process. I believe their peating level is something like 25 ppm. Evan, if you have Malt Whiskey Yearbook, maybe you can
Yeah, I'll
double
take a look
check
at that.
We even know who did the mashing. It was an employee named Gordon McKay or Mackay. 3 Waters. They gave us the temperatures. It was the fermentation was monitored by Nick Doherty. This was fermented to an average of 76 hours. Nicky, I'm guessing the same Nicky, ran distillation as well with the middle cut or the spirit run starting at 73, ending at 64. It's a bourbon barrel, filled November of 2016. It was bottled March 26th by Kelly Combe, Holly McCaffrey, and Reese Donaldson. So we even know who bottled it, which is kind of funny. So Rob asking, how do they control the peating ppm? I mean, that would be done by the maltster. So Ardnamurchan doesn't malt on site. They just don't have the room. And floor maltings are both time consuming and expensive, and they're not as consistent if you're looking to get a level. But commercial malting plants can dial in the level of phenols you want in the barley fairly precisely. And they can even use different types of peat depending on what kind of profile you're looking for. So Evan,
So,
what did you find?
so surprisingly 30 to 35
30
ppm
to
is what they
35.
say. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't necessarily get that off that, and that's there's probably a big argument to be made that the level of peat in the barley does not translate, and
Well, that's a
maybe they
great
should
point.
measure before they hit the bottle, more than anything
Well,
else.
Torvig did that. Another one of our
Yeah,
favorite newish
yeah,
distilleries or new distilleries.
yeah.
They give you both the ppms going into the distillation, like the barley from before it's milled and mashed and fermented. But they also give you the number of ppms in the bottle, which is kind of cool. So this was
Yeah, Mikkel
bottled at
Tor was doing
7 years of
something
age.
similar. Yeah,
What's that, Evan?
I think Mikkel Tor from Glenelg was doing something similar.
Mm-hmm. 57.5 after 7 years. And this is a fully peated Ardmore single cask.
Yeah, yeah, you can really see where Andrew was alluding to the long fermentation times. Like this is an interesting whiskey style to try and do at young age for me because like there's a pretty strong minerality to it, which can lead to things being pretty tight, but there's
Mhm.
also a lot of funk. Like there's this
Oh,
lactic sort of creamy cheesiness,
it's
but
so
there's some
cheesy.
beautiful notes coming along with that. Some light fruit, incredibly creamy. It reminds me of the Linkwood almost on the palate, in a really nice manner on this one.
It's goat cheese and lemon to me on the
Mhm.
nose, along with the
That's a good
smoke,
call.
or chev, if you will. The smoke's not really a big factor on the nose. On the palate, you get this surge of barley, and it's just this really juicy,
Mhm.
chewy malt. The smoke is clean. There's a little bit of a maritime edge to it. The barley is almost gristy. It's like when you get a chance
Yeah.
to actually chew malted barley that's been kilned. Um, Bright citrus notes, still a little bit of that cheesy funk, morphing into a bit like almost melons, as well as some nice citrus tones.
Yeah, even like texturally, it's got well, there's a touch of mint on the nose and the palate, but it reminds me it's going into like Fisherman's Friends territory,
Cool
with those
mint.
coastal notes as well.
Oh yeah. The smoke on this, like it's funny. The nose is so like it's so subtle, almost
Mhm.
hard to pick up. But then on the palate, it's really like the star of the show. I mean, it's just so bright, clean, and smoky.
Mhm. Are you gonna science this one?
Yeah, you know what? This one I might add some science too to see what happens.
Yeah. There's I've been thinking about this distillery a lot, especially since we got the single cask. But to me, this is probably the best sub 15-year-old distillery in Scotland. They have notes that are reminiscent of bits of Bruichladdich and their Port Charlotte distillate. Very reminiscent of Campbelltown style malts from Glen Scotia and Springbank as well.
Yeah.
Just a lot of like old school funk to it, but done in an approachable manner.
One of the oddities of this place, and it's the hardest to get to distillery in mainland Scotland because it's on this peninsula called the Ardmore Peninsula. I believe the British Special Air Service trained out there during World War II because it's very rugged, very remote. People figured no one would see them training there. Um, yeah, that's interesting. And if you're interested in driving out there, be forewarned. It's like driving on a bike path for two-way traffic on a windy coast. And if it's raining, the burns just spill right over the road. So I love driving. It's fun. Evan knows this. It's maybe not
Mhm.
the most fun to drive with me in Scotland. But it's a beautiful, beautiful drive. Uh, the distillery creates very old school whiskeys in a traditional way, but it is also the first, I believe, fully carbon neutral distillery in Scotland, eco certified. They use biomass boilers that use the waste product from logging on an estate that they sit on, and hydropower from the streams that actually flow right through the property to power the distillery. So
Mhm.
it's an interesting concept, um, for a new distillery, that's trying to make old school whiskeys. They're also conscious about the environment. And actually, one of the facts we love about them, Evan, is they don't waste your money on boxes or tubes. Or if they do, the
Yep.
boxes are compostable.
Mhm. That's right. Yeah. They're very lucky to have a very consistent independent bottler as owners as well.
Mhm.
In AD, or sorry, in Adelphi, pardon me. But so they've got some stability behind them, and that's kind of let them be very careful with how they wanted to go about doing things. So there wasn't the need to have income coming all the way through their first or beginning years there.
Yeah. An interesting little side note about it. The guy in charge of Adelphi and Ardmore is a lovely chap by the name of Alex Bruce, who is a direct descendant of Robert the Bruce, the King of Scotland from Braveheart times, for what it's worth.
Mhm.
Uh, should we go on to the Kalila?
Yeah.
So the second, or well, I guess this would be our penultimate whiskey, right? This is
Yep.
the last before the last of the whiskeys in the range. And then if you'll bear with us, we like to do what we call our speed rounds, where we quickly go back through the range to see how it's changed over the course of the tasting. So the next one we're on to is from an independent bottler called Single Cask Nation, which is now owned by the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, but was founded by a couple of Americans that were really into single malt whiskey. Um, I don't know if it was also tied into the Jewish Whiskey Company at one point in time,
I
but
think it was because they did have they don't do it anymore, but I think a lot of their first bottlings were specifically kosher,
yeah.
if I recall correctly.
So an interesting brand. Interesting Canadian connection to this. One of the original guys in Single Cask Nation owns a whiskey shop in Edmonton called Whiskey Drop, Graham Usher, who is descended from the Ushers of Usher's whiskey in Scotland. And the first time I met the guy who's still running Single Cask Nation, one of the founders, a guy by the name of Josh, who's going to be in town, or no, he's going to be doing a virtual with us shortly. I met him on a ferry to Isla where he was going to pick out casks with Graham Usher from, at that point in time, it was called Unwind, but it became Whiskey Drop shop in Edmonton. Anyway, this is a single Kalila cask from 2015, finished in Brazilian rum for 1 year, bottled at 57.4%. And there's an interesting side story to this whiskey that I love telling, because Kalilas, even 8-year-old Kalilas like this, 2-3 years ago, we would see offers to do casks, and they would be, by the time we got them into the store, $220 a bottle. And we just started saying no, like we're not going to do it. And I remember when we were offered this cask, I tried it, it was lovely. And I said, I if the price is anything more than X, I don't want to know, because, and I think these were the words I used to the importer, the days of $200 8-year-old Kalilas are gone. And he got back to me and he said, yeah, I think we can, let me talk to them, but I'm pretty sure we can hit that price for you. So in the context of what we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years, $110 for a cast strength Kalila is pretty inexpensive. And I mean, this is really where things should be. I mean, you shouldn't be paying more than $120 for 8-year-old Scotch whiskey, because you shouldn't. Like, any more than that is just kind of obscene. And more to the point, this is just a lovely, very fruity, very decadent Kalila, with some nice kind of bacon scallop tones too.
Yeah, bacon and scallops, big time for me. It definitely has that oily and coastal style of Kalila in spades, but it has this sort of like tropical fruitiness that's coming through, maybe from the rum cask,
Yeah.
maybe just from the Kalila itself, but it's got this fun sort of cane note that's coming through from the rum as well.
Um, Evan will have heard a version of this many times. I'm not a huge fan of cask finishing. I often find it all I find a lot of them are done for the wrong reasons. They're trying to jazz something up at the last minute, and all they end up doing is making it kind of uneven or at best inconsistent, uneven. And I was skeptical about this when I saw that it was a rum finish, because if you think about what rum casks are, they're American bourbon barrels that have been used. They then put rum in them. They're often used for very long periods of time, often used many times over and over.
Mhm.
So just wasn't super excited about it. And I found rum casks have been, most of them have been pretty lackluster or uninteresting. But we got this, we tried it, and then we found out what they could do on price on it, and it was a no-brainer for us. To your point, Evan, I think the rum does add an actual appreciable amount of complexity to this. I think you're right, it's adding those like pineapple, mango, sort of bright tropical tones, because we don't see tropical notes like that typically in young whiskeys like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually, especially with Caol, you got to get into much, much older
Mhm.
juice. But it still has that young, ruggedly coastal style to it. A little bit ashy, but almost like licking shellfish shells as well. It's got a lot going on for it.
Not sharp, not aggressive, but sweet, smoky, fruity. Just a really, you know, again, like that Linkwood, dangerously drinkable young single
Yeah.
malt.
I've never had this next to the Ardmore yet, and that's a pretty fun peated pairing.
Mhm. Quite the contrast. When you go back, the Ardmore is all about the malt, the cheese,
Mhm.
the fruit, whereas it's smoke and like sugars and bright fruits, and then bacon and scallops. I worry.
Yeah. Yeah, Rob, I can understand where you're coming from. My spare time is my family's time. So this is my acting sane moments, I guess, or my way to unwind, as it may be.
Evan has three children who are
Yes.
less than
10 and under. Yeah.
less
Yeah.
than teenagers. So,
Yeah.
uh, all right, the last one, which is the one I'm most excited about because it's one of my favorite whiskeys in recent memory at the store. It's notable for a bunch of reasons, including uh, I would say at least once a year. Evan can fact check me on this. I will make a bold statement that I have to walk back at some point in time,
Yeah.
such as when we were offered these samples before I even tried them. I hate Ardmore. We're never going to bottle a cask of Ardmore. And then we get this cask of Ardmore, and it's
Mhm.
absolutely spectacular. So we have to bottle it. The reason I don't love Ardmore is I find it's a very inconsistent single malt. When it's young, I find it's very barnyardy in a way that I don't like. Evan's laughing because Evan loves Ardmore.
Yep.
Big fan. Even the Ardmores that I find undrinkable, Evan has, I would say, almost a sadomasochistic love of, would be how I would perceive it.
There's definitely a weird form of like a mutated version of masculinity to do with it, I guess. Where it in Lecheg, where it's like I love to love it just because nobody else does.
Yeah,
Sadly, there have been others like me that have really gotten on the Ardmore and Lecheg train
I was
over the
dog
last
walking with
while.
one of
But
those gentlemen earlier today.
that's right,
So,
that's right.
um, yeah, well, Lecheg. If you're not familiar, Lecheg, people say Lafroig is the love it or hate it malt, but I actually think it's Lecheg. I think
Yeah,
Lecheg is more divisive than even
it
Lafroig.
is.
Um, but Evan, I think what I'm learning about you is that you occasionally like to be contrarian for contrarian's sake. Is
But
that a fair
you're
point?
like I've been with you for nearly 10 years. That's you're just learning that now.
Maybe. I'm a slow learner. Um, anyway, there's a lot of things that I love about this particular bottle. I'll pop it up on screen. Did I put the Kalila up on screen? I think I did.
Yep.
Um, so uh, I love this because if you go back, if you're able to go back and nose that Glentauchers for a moment, that really sort of intense, almost syrupy, slightly acidic, leathery sherry profile that you get in the Glentauchers 2000. And then you come back to this, the subtlety of the sherry notes in this to me are incredible. It granted it's a refill sherry hogshead, so it was used to mature Scotch whiskey once before. But again, look at the color on this. If that's the case, it's incredible. But this to me is very emblematic of the sherry cask whiskeys that I saw when I started in the industry 21 years ago. The type of whiskeys that we would get. This is what, old sherried whiskeys tasted like 2 decades ago. And it's not something we see a lot of anymore. They were more subtle. They could be very dark and very rich, but they were still balanced. You could still get the distillate from it. And I think that's what I love about this. Ardmore, I find needs one of two things. It either needs time or it needs a good sherry cask. And if it has that, you can get something lovely. This has both. And so in addition to those nice soft sherry tones intermingling with that really delicate, elegant smoke, you've got these tropical tones that are creeping into. And to me, this is a whiskey that reminds me of the way whiskeys used to be before whiskeys got like big and popular and in demand. And the industry had to find ways to meet that demand by, I don't want to say cutting corners because I think that almost cheapens what's available now, but to a point, I think that is kind of what this is an example of. It's a style of whiskey that most people can't put out today because they just simply don't have the casks to do it.
Yeah. Don't have the casks and don't have the patience for it as well, I think. Like this is just I've been lucky enough to try this quite a few times now, but it just seems to be at this sweet spot where there's like you can see how with a big sherry cask, there's going to be a battle between the spirit and the cask from a very young age, all the way through its life in that cask. And the distillate here at this age and the sherry cask just seem to be both tempered by the other in a perfect fashion, where nothing's taking over. You're getting both sides of the story, and it's very, very cohesive.
Yeah. The palate on it, really soft chocolate, really soft leather. So there are notes that are similar to the ones you get in that Glentauchers, but they're more subtle, they're more elegant, they're more delicate. Uh, I've made a bold statement. I stand behind it. I think this is the best Ardmore I've ever had. I've probably had, and I did some number crunching to figure out over 21 years, I've probably tried well over 100 different Ardmores. And this is the first one that really stood out to me and stunned me. And I've had some good ones over the years, don't get me wrong. But it's not a distillery where I had whiskeys where I was like, holy crap, that's good. And I think this is one of those ones.
Yeah, Andrew, you've got a question about the glass you're using for the Ardmore there.
Sounds good. Well, maybe what we should do, and Steve Lee, I don't know if you want to contribute to this, but we like to do what we call the speed round, which is we go back and we don't talk about the whiskeys. We just quickly talk about how they are at this moment in the glass. And then, see if they've changed, evolved. Our palates can change and evolve over the course of the tasting. They've been oxidizing there for at least an hour and a half now. Do you have any left? Are you going to speed round with Evan and I? All right,
Sure.
Steve is in.
Yeah.
Okay. So back to that Linkwood 2011. It's like going into a fancy French hotel bathroom right now.
It does have this soft, fruity perfume note to it. And there's just a light note of Play-Doh in with it.
But it's a fancy one, so it's subtle. The perfume, it's there, but it's not so overpowering that you want to leave the room. Steve Lee?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd go with that. A bit of a citrusy, floral kind of cleaner. So as soon as you said that hotel room, I was like, yeah, it's clean and fresh.
Love it. Who
Yeah,
doesn't love
you've
a
taken
clean
a cup of
hotel bathroom?
chamomile tea. You've taken a couple of chamomile tea into the bathroom for a shower.
Hmm. Okay. All right, man. So I took 2 sips of that. So fruity. It's amazing how much that has held up with everything much bigger and bolder that followed it. Blair Athol. It's like slightly bloody caramel bar.
Yeah. It's you have to like crack open those barley husks to get at the blood, though.
Really spicy. Wow. Ooh. It's almost got a heat to the spice. And a bit of rust. I'm getting like a rusty note from it too.
Getting a bit of ginger, like ginger snap spice,
Good call.
almost like that ginger beer.
Yeah,
Are you
yeah, that ginger
talking,
note's good.
you talking the Royal Jamaican or the Fentimans or
I would go with the Hollows and Fentimans 4% ginger brew.
okay.
Wow.
Nice. Like it. All right. Glenfarclas, the door crasher.
It's into the maple, like the brown sugar mini wheats right now on the nose.
It's rich, dark spices, brown sugar, going into some candied fruit tones as well. But yeah, it's very approachable for the strength.
I gotta hit a butterscotch with like a little bit of that underlying fruit, but kept going back to and getting that almost a butter and a butterscotch, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see that. Like
Yeah,
old English butterscotch ice cream.
well, even like butter melting on toast as you're spreading it.
Well, it's funny you say that because it now smells like when my daughter's making her browned butter chocolate chip cookies. Just powers to and she's not even here until next weekend. So there
Yeah,
won't be cookies until next weekend.
now you'll have to call her. Be like, honey, I miss you.
Yeah, be like, Chloe, please make a batch of cookies or at least the batter so we can put them in the oven when you get here.
That's right.
Interesting fact, she likes to age her cookie batter for a day before she bakes the cookies. I didn't know that was a thing.
She's not working at the store anymore.
No, she's working for big government in Edmonton. Um, listening in on phone calls between provinces and stuff like that. Yeah, she's all grown up, Steve Lee. Possibly getting married this summer. You never know.
Wow. You'll be a grandfather soon.
The rumors are there. Yeah. And I think if the nuptials go ahead as planned, I probably will be. The Millstone is just it's a whiskey. I can't believe it's 7 years old. I think it drinks way above its age. There's a nice elegance to it, nice sherry tones, nice balance.
Yeah. Well, we didn't mention the first time around is Dutch licorice, which comes off on this one.
Little bit of salty licorice, not German licorice or like what I
No,
call fetish licorice.
no, it's a Dutch single malt. It's got to be Dutch licorice.
Yeah. All right. Glentauchers is. Oh, Steve Lee, we didn't let you speak about the Millstone yet. Thoughts on the Millstone?
That's okay. You guys are used to working together as a dynamic duo, so having a third stooge in the group is probably a bit
More
of a
like
challenge for you.
freestyling, or I don't know if people do that thing that. What's that thing where you let people throw random ideas and you write them all down?
So yeah,
Brainstorming?
on the Millstone,
Yeah,
which I
brainstorming.
always enjoy Millstone. I'm certainly impressed. It's very licoricey to me, but almost like a really oaky licorice. Black licorice.
Yeah. The Glentauchers, I think it's just a banger of a 20-plus-year-old sherry whiskey. Rich, spicy. I think the sherry tones have actually mellowed quite a bit on this. It's not quite as tannic as it was before. It's settled down quite a bit.
Yeah, there's a big peach cobbler note coming through for me on the nose right now.
Mm. There is talk in the chat of Yvonne cooking or baking cookies for people, I think. I don't know if I misread that, but apparently a talented chef. So
Nice. I was just thinking that we don't advertise our address enough in these tastings, Andrew.
and we have been sent baked goods previously.
We have been.
Yeah, I mean the funniest one was 2 different types of banana bread because I believe in one of our tastings we suggested there could be a banana bread of the month club. And someone sent us 2 different versions of banana bread, which was incredible.
Yeah.
So, where are we? We're all like the speed round, as you can tell, often gets bogged down. the further
Derailed.
We go.
Yeah.
Ardmore.
Steve Lee on the Glentauchers.
Oh yes.
I get a bit of a maple syrup note
Yeah.
to it. It's a really interesting one
Nice.
because I find with this one, every time I go back, it's a bit different. When I first poured it into the glass, I got that dreaded kind of sulfur note. But as it sat in the glass, it's more of a syrupy kind of fruity note to it. It seems like a fresh sherry.
I think
Yeah, you talk
again,
about
a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's a finish as opposed to a like full-term maturation. But yeah, I agree. Like it's changed a lot. And for me, I you know, we have a guy in our store, Kurt, who's obsessive about sulfur. And like he's like the canary in the coal mine for sulfur, and his tolerance is low, like extremely low. And I think this is a whiskey where like I don't know that he got it, but there's hallmarks in it of whiskeys that are often very sulfured. Like there's something about the structure of it that's very reminiscent of that. And yeah, I think it's that new school, that very tannic, leathery style, because you often see that sulfured sherry connected to that. I mean, I think especially if Glenrothes was really like that. Anyway, Ardnamurchan, it's barley, sugars, and smoke with a bit of cheese.
Yeah, with a and a layer of custard over top of everything.
I don't know how I can add on that. There's a lot of cheese on this. As it sat in the glass, I found that cheese note came out a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There is a light touch of like making s'mores around the fire as well on the nose for me.
A little bit of like Isle of Mull cheddar with like what do you call it? What did you put on? I don't know. I had it on the tip of my head for a moment there. A chutney, like it's kind of got like cheddar and chutney note.
And like salty, but also peppery on the finish there.
All right.
I really like the maltiness on that.
Yeah. I don't know. There's like a massive sort of agave nectar sort of sweetness to this on the nose.
It's going into like squidding pasta right now too.
Did you say sweating pasta?
Squid ink. Squid ink. Yeah.
I was like, I don't know this. Maybe Yvonne could tell us this sweating pasta technique.
Yeah, it's something you do with fresh pasta before you toss it in flour, just to kind of like dry it all up.
You take it into a finished sauna with like a lot of water. So
that's right. That's right. You actually just throw it against the wall and then it cooks there.
Well, I think it's cooking on road tar.
Yeah.
Freshly paved road tar. It's kind of sweet.
Road tar. Tarry, it's ashy. It's got a like, I don't know, kind of I don't know, cachaça cocktail kind of vibe to it. Like sort of like a rough, like a sugarcane moonshine spirit sort of vibe.
I think you mentioned mezcal on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does have that sort of like fainty Like, I think you always describe it as like burnt electronics
Yeah,
note.
that is a good one. Kalila, I mean, it's such a funny whiskey because it can be so many different styles,
Yep.
but it's the same. It's like
So many
Chardonnay.
different styles. Yeah, but almost never like impossible to mess up. Seemingly like you can toss it at whatever cask you want.
All right, and then last but not, or Steve Lee, or yeah, you commented on this. Last but not least, the Ardmore.
Yep.
Oh God, it's like milk chocolate, like Nestle's Quick on a Sunday with like boozy cherries.
Like an ice cream sundae, not we're having it now on this day.
Mm-hmm. And the palate's just beautiful.
Yeah, there's a bitterness to this one that I just absolutely adore, where it's getting into like dark chocolate and espresso notes.
Mm.
Uh, but that underlying tropical note is just it's killer. That's a killer combination.
Tropical with like a touch of Amaro.
Hmm. Yeah, Amaro is a good call.
Yeah,
Yeah, I really get that chocolate covered cherry, a bit of fresh pineapple.
yeah, beautiful whiskey. Um, Evan, we often have polls, but we didn't set one up. But if
No,
people
no, we
want to
should have,
like
but
put their favorites in the chat, we would love to know what your top two or top three favorites are. And put them into the
yeah,
chat.
if it makes it easier too, just put the number. You don't have to type the name if you don't want to.
Like number 1 through 8. Or just the distillery name, because we didn't have any repeats here. Like, although I realize that could be confusing for people, which is the distillery versus the bottler. But Steve Lee, if we were to ask you, did you have favorites in tonight's lineup? If we were to say three, could you pick three favorites?
I liked both the Gordon and MacPhail, the Glentauchers, and the Ardmore,
Mm-hmm.
and I really enjoy the balance in Millstone. Yeah, the Glentauchers is an interesting one because I just found that every time I went back to it, it had changed a little bit in the glass. The Ardmore is certainly soft and gentle, and you have to dig into the whiskey a little bit, which I always enjoy. So every time you go back, it has something else to give you. And the Millstone is always, I've just found them really well balanced.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So those would be my three.
Nice. All right, Evan.
Ardmore is going to be my second. It's almost impossible to put that in any tasting and not have it being in my top two. It's just a fantastic dram. I love how it's got that crazy combination of minerality plus malt plus coastal notes plus smoke is just like somehow stupidly complex at a young age. And then number one is the Ardmore for me. The Ardmore, I think this is actually the best it's actually shown in a tasting I've been in. It's just showing so well right now with that balance and that combination of bitter and sweet.
I think I'm similar to both of you. My third favorite though is going to be different. I really like that Linkwood. It's just to me, it's so drinkable. I mean that's the kind of whiskey I could drink almost any day of the week and it wouldn't exhaust my palate. So that is my favorite, or not my favorite, it's my third favorite. My second and first favorite are the Glentauchers and the Ardmore. And my really crude way of summing this up is the Glentauchers is like going to Dairy Queen for a peanut butter parfait. I know what it's going to be. I know it's not like intricately well made with like top quality ingredients, but it's what I want and it's great. The Ardmore is like someone taking me to a Michelin star restaurant for dessert and like them blowing my mind. So
Yeah, that's a good call.
um
Quite a few different votes from the looks of it. Quite a few eights in there. Quite a few sixes as well. Yeah, pretty good spread. I agree that liquid going back to it too. It's gone from full like floral to yeasty, where it almost reminds me of just being around a mash or something fermenting in a tank right now.
Or like a ball of pizza dough that you're about to start rolling out.
Yeah, yeah, good call. A little bit of lychee in there too.
Now, Steve Lee, if you want, we can open this up for a couple minutes of questions, but if we're going to do that, well, Evan, I guess there's two things you could do. Maybe we cut it at this point if you're going to put it on YouTube. Uh, but if people wanted to ask questions, we can open it up, and presumably people watching it might be interested in those, but we won't put those on our YouTube because we don't
Yeah,
put people's faces on YouTube or Facebook unless they want to be on there. So if that makes sense.
yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Um, so yeah, if anyone's got any questions, I'm gonna move from speaker view to gallery so I can see. You can either throw in the chat or you can do this thing. I think you can put your hand up. How does one do that? They changed where everything is on here at one point in time. So, but I think if you can put your hand up in your window, and if we see that you have a question, we'd be happy to let you pose it. So, oh, Judy is asking about the glasses. So,
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of good glassware. For drinking, I love the Glencairn glasses, partly because I like the way they feel in my hand. I like the shape. I especially love the cut crystal glasses. And I know where you're going with Judy. I'll get to the specific one in a second. Um, that's my favorite for drinking. For tastings, I prefer using ISO glasses. Partly just because you can hold them with the stem, they're a little lighter. Um, Similar kind of approach, like what Steve Lee's got. I think they're an ideal glass for nosing, partly because they're tapered a bit at the top. They trap the nose in the glass. But if I really want to geek out, especially on older whiskeys, I love these. They're called old-fashioned blenders glasses or 1920s blenders glasses. You can buy them online. I'm not sure where, like probably from the Whiskey Exchange. You might be able to get them from Elixir Distillers. I don't know if they sell, but it's kind of an exaggerated version of an ISO glass where there's a bit more room for oxidation, but again, it's very tapered. They are not a great glass to drink whiskey from, but they're better for me, especially for older whiskeys. For nosing them, I find that I get more from the spirit if I'm using these old school glasses. Suzanne asking, can you go over the SCN Kalila again because we liked it. So single cask nation, independent baller Kalila. It's an 8-year-old, $110, I think that is what we're selling it for, which is a pretty good price for a single cask Kalila. But yeah, if you have any other specific questions, happy to answer them. I'm just trying. Oh, React. Maybe that's yeah. Oh, you can if you put recognized hand gestures, I think. Does AI do stuff? Or I don't know. I think it's supposed to do something. Evan's just
On the
I think
bottom of
if you continue and to do the rest of the Macarena, it'll do something for you.
you mean like
Yeah, there you go.
I'm a terrible dancer. It doesn't stop me. Steve Lee's got a question.
yeah, if you just go to your reactions at the bottom of your screen, it'll ask you if you would like to raise your hand.
Very cool.
There you go. Oh, play chime for raised hands. Oh, maybe that's so that I hear a raised hand. If no one has any questions, you certainly don't have to ask any if you don't have them, but welcome to you. I can see there's a cat in there. Mark's got a cat. That's fun. Walter, my dog, does like to appear in videos from time to time, but he's sleeping. He had a busy day. Well, if there are any questions, Steve Lee, do you guys have any, do you have to discuss any events you have coming up or anything like that? Is there anything people should know?
Well, our next two tastings are in April. Crystal's much better with this. So I believe our next tasting is April 20th, and anybody who's on the board can certainly confirm or deny that. Maybe it's not the 20th. That looks like the Easter weekend. It could be the 27th. And we have one more tasting in June as well. So we're still lining up the guest speakers for those events, but one of those two events will be whiskey and cocktails. So much like we did a couple of years ago, and this is for Andrew and Evan, we pour the whiskey side by side, and then you get the opportunity to make cocktails, which was really popular for us. And both of those will be at Frank Venable's Theater as well.
Yeah. So I did see a good question in here. How can we get these in BC? You can't technically, but you can purchase them from a shop in Alberta that can hold them for you until you or a friend happen to be coming through. Or there might be some other options I don't want to volunteer or offer, but
so if I could jump in, if anybody orders from Kensington Wine Market and they let them know that it's for Borderline Whisky Enthusiasts, I will pick that up. My next trip to Calgary is in April when I'm there for the Made with Love event. So I can grab that.
Yeah, and we do offer to whiskey clubs, we offer a discount. If you place an order on our website, which doesn't charge you because we don't take payments for our website, just put in the notes Borderline Whiskey Club, 10% discount, and my staff will come to me like, what the hell is this? And then I'll tell them that unless you're already set up in our system, if you're not, or if you're already set up in our system, then it's not an issue. Yeah, we are happy to hold things for people, and we do offer clubs like Borderline a discount if they buy from a shop. But, and this is a big thing I want to say because there are great local shops, including, I know there's a great local shop in Kelowna. I did a tasting there in the fall. Steve Lee, it's where Stephen Rankin's tasting is. What's it called?
It's Arc Liquor, which sells the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society bottlings.
So the only thing I would say is we're not really looking to sell you stuff you can buy locally. We're only interested in selling you stuff that you can't buy there. So if you have a local liquor store, I have zero interest in you trying to buy stuff from us, even if it's slightly cheaper. You should support your local retailer. But for example, everything we tried tonight is stuff you can't buy anywhere else. So if there was something you really liked, you unfortunately would have to buy it from us. But we're happy to extend a discount to your club. But I do truly want to say this because I don't want people to get the wrong idea. We're not looking to replace the place that you get your local stuff. That's not our business. We're interested in selling you stuff you can't find anywhere else. So yeah.
And the Gordon and MacPhail tasting is coming up this Friday with Okanagan Whiskey Enthusiasts as well. And I know Judy's got a ticket. I see her waving in the background.
Steven's a great guy. That tasting will probably go for 3 hours, but he tells great stories, so it'll be worth it.
He does.
And as a side note as well, for those of you, I know Rob and Kelly have done a tastings for us as well. They've moved their Kelowna Scotch Malt Whiskey Society tastings to quarterly. So if you can get up, if you're interested to do a trip up there, certainly let me know because I'm going to try. We want to see that branch survive in Kelowna. So we certainly have the whiskey people in the Okanagan to support them. So if you see that tasting pop up. Well, Rob and Kelly, they did offer a shuttle and they subsidized it and was very reasonably priced, but it's a big drive for us. It's about an hour from here.
Oh yeah, at least one. Yeah, it's got to be close to an hour and a half for you. Yeah. Rob is saying that. Well, yeah, interprovincial trade barriers. Let's be honest, this is Canada. Those interprovincial trade barriers aren't going anywhere. Everyone's got their sacred cows in this country. So I hope
Yeah.
they go somewhere, but until they do, we'll make the best with what we've got. Well,
Yeah, the last sacred cows to go will be the provincially regulated monopolies. So
yeah. Well, Steve Lee, thank you very much for organizing this tonight. Evan, thanks for co-hosting with me.
cheers.
Yeah.
Glad I could do this
You-
for the second year.
Steve
It's
Lee,
been
do you
awesome.
want me to turn this over to you? Like, do you guys like to hang out and chat afterwards, or?
Yeah, if you want to turn over the host, I can certainly. You don't want to hear our bad mouthing of that other distillery on the island there. I can't remember its name. I